Okay, welcome. Hello, Mary, and welcome to everyone who might be listening right now, or perhaps will listen to this later on. My name is Pernilla Rosell, as you can see, and I will be interviewing Mary McGovern today. And this is a new initiative that we would like to start from the Martinus Institute, Copenhagen, and the Martinus Center in Clint. We have some teaching in English, as some of you might know already, but we have a world situation right now that is quite dramatic, and also due to other reasons, we would like to be available. We would like to be visible, and we would like to give some interviews, we'll do some lectures or have some talks about current topics are available to everyone, and we would like to start today. So you can watch this on Crowdcast, but also on YouTube, and it will be free for everyone. And this is the first time, so we're very happy to have our technician Jonas here behind the scenes who's helping out, and we hope that everything will be working out. But hello, Mary, nice to see you. I'm in Stockholm, and where are you?
Yes, I'm at home in Frederiksberg, which is part of Copenhagen.
That's why we are also sitting like this and not in the studio in Clint, where you might perhaps be sitting later on.
Yeah.
But it's fantastic with the technology that we have, that this is possible to do. And we would like actually to talk about a subject that we might have mentioned before in the Martinus Cosmology podcasts. You have carried out a lot of interviews, and I made a lot of podcasts, Mary, but we just realized we have never really focused on food, and especially on plant-based food. So we thought this might be a nice topic to talk about. And we will also like to invite you who are listening to ask questions later on, if you like. But to start with plant-based food, it's an expression that I don't remember when I heard it for the first time, but when I was a child, I certainly didn't know it. I grew up as a vegetarian. That was quite unusual in the 70s. I'm born in 1969, and it was unusual, but possible, of course, to be a vegetarian in Sweden. In Sweden, you get free school lunches, but my mother always had to apply, especially for us to get this vegetarian food for me and for my two sisters. And I think we were the only pupils in a school with perhaps 300 or 400 pupils. Today it's quite different. Every school in Sweden still has free school lunches, but they are obliged to serve 2 meals, either a meal with meat and fish and a vegetarian meal every day, and you don't have to register. So the situation has changed dramatically, and we can give lots of examples and statistics. And just to have one example, we could see, I read recently that the percentage of Swedish people who are vegetarians have risen from 19% to 30% just in the last 6 years. There's dramatic increase, and I think it's the same in many other countries, which you know more about. It's a very, very to be a vegan or to eat plant-based food is no longer something that is very, very marginal in society. It's an increasing trend, you know a lot about research made on this, but we also know that Martinus actually wrote about food as early as 1933, as we also wrote in the little text of this interview. He wrote the book The Ideal Food, which you can see there, translated into English. You are our main translator. Yeah. And we know that it's still a popular book to buy, but he was very early, of course, and we will come back to his book and what he writes about food and nutrition. But perhaps you could just begin by saying something about yourself. You've been interested in food and health for a long time. I know that. So could you tell us about how this started? When did you start?
Yeah, of course, I was born before you. I was born in 1953, and I remember when I was born in Scotland, and I remember going to another town. as a family, we almost never ate in restaurants, but now we were out of town and we had to eat in a restaurant. And my mother bought what she thought was the very best for us, and that was a big bloody steak. And I remember this steak arriving on my plate, and it was bleeding on my plate. And I suddenly saw in my mind's eye a cow that lacked a big slice of its side, and I realized, I said, "There's a cow on my plate. There's a cow on my plate." And I started crying in the restaurant, which my mother found was really embarrassing. And there was no way I could eat it. It was just, and of course, my mother was very upset because it cost a lot of money and we didn't have much money. Anyway, after that, I didn't want to eat meat at all, because I really, it was the first time I really made the connection between the death of an animal or the suffering of an animal and what was on my plate. But my mother said at that time that I would die if I didn't eat meat. So the only way she could get me to eat it was to cook it so that it absolutely fell apart by itself. She made it so tender that I could actually swallow it. But so that was 9 years old and wanted to be a vegetarian, but I didn't know any vegetarians, and I'd never heard of vegetarianism. I don't think my mother had either. And then when I was 20, I moved to London. I went to the music conservatory there, one of the music conservatories. And beside the music conservatory, there was a vegetarian restaurant. And on my second day at the conservatory, then I had lunch there, along with some of the other students and one of my professors. And it turned out they were all vegetarians, this little group of people. So I asked one of the girls why she was vegetarian. And she said in a rather gruff voice, "Because I don't like eating corpses." I thought, oh, of course, that's not what I would say to other people who eat meat. But anyway, that's what she said to me. And then I was totally finished. I just couldn't eat meat after that. And this restaurant was really wonderful. It was a sort of lunch restaurant. A lot of the students used it, and the journalists from Fleet Street. So it was a rather nice place to be. But they made a point of educating people to be healthy vegetarians. So they had posters saying, if you eat this dish for lunch, then you should supplement by eating this or the other in the evening, and so on. So you could really learn about being a healthy vegetarian there. Mm. You know, we have an expression in English called a tea and toast vegetarian. And that's an expression for the fact that you know what you don't want to eat, but you don't know what to eat. So, but this restaurant really helped people to eat. And the prices were such that students could eat there every day. So I ate there nearly every day while I was studying at the conservatory, and had this little group of vegetarian friends and this vegetarian professor. And we had great philosophical discussions over our vegetarian meals. So, and rather shortly after that, I read an earlier translation of this little book, The Ideal Food. Of course, I got an awful lot of opposition from my family about being vegetarian. They thought it was a crazy idea. But when I read that, I really felt supported. And of course, I felt supported by the restaurant that did so much to help us be healthy vegetarians. So, but people can very easily perceive your own vegetarianism as criticism of their meat eating, which was certainly not my intention, but it can come across like that if you're not careful. So yeah, so that's how it started for me.
It's very interesting just comparing the situation that I grew up in, because I was brought up as a vegetarian. My parents told us that we were free to choose. If we didn't want to be vegetarians, we could also eat meat, but we didn't. But our surroundings were, as I mentioned earlier, of course, meat eaters at the time. But I think today, if you compare to at least to Swedish children today, if they say to their parents or in school they want to be vegan, then they will get vegan food. So it's a huge difference also from what you described. But it must have been a clear inner sense that you had that this was really important to you. It was really important. And I felt when
when I found that restaurant and I found this food, I felt I had sort of come home. This. I was in the right place, like as regards food, and it really helped to have the support of a little group of friends. So we're all music students, or this professor who was very idealistic. So we had good vegetarian food combined with good intellectual discussions about music nearly every day, Monday to Friday, for the whole of my training at the conservatory. So it was very good. And then of course, when you become vegetarian, then you start to read books on it and how can I be a healthy vegetarian and so on.
Because that's what people used to say. I remember, perhaps not as common today, but they used to say, well, how do you get the nutrition that you need? And are you sure you get the protein that you need? And isn't it very difficult to be a vegetarian or a vegan?
Yeah, I think this protein business is so overrated. I've never met a vegetarian who liked protein or a vegan who liked protein. I think I remember once I wasn't very well and I went to my doctor and he said, well, you're vegetarian, what do you expect? You're probably lacking protein. And he tested my protein and he was totally shocked. He said, your protein's absolutely normal. Actually, it's better than mine, he said. So, it's a big myth that vegetarians like protein. They don't. Yeah. There's protein in vegetables. There's protein in pulses, chickpeas, beans. There's loads of protein. If there's anything people lack, really, it's fiber, because they maybe don't need to eat enough vegetables, or they don't need to eat enough pulses and so on, and not enough fruit and that kind of thing. So if you are a sort of tea and toast vegetarian, you're just living on white bread and coffee or something, then of course you will like all sorts of stuff. But if you're eating a wide variety of pulses, different sorts of vegetables, root vegetables, green vegetables, there's loads of protein in broccoli, for example, and nuts. I happen to be allergic to nuts, so I can't eat them, but for those who can eat nuts, then there's loads of protein in nuts, as far as I understand. I must stress that I'm not an expert on nutrition, so if you want to ask me about chemistry and nutrition, I'm not the person. But anyway, this protein question always comes up, and it's a big myth. But I think a lot of problems could be solved if people got a lot more fiber. That's a big deficiency, both among meat. There's no fiber in meat, so there's a lot of meat eaters are very deficient in fiber. So.
Yeah, we have actually collected, or you have collected, a lot of links to different sites and sources where you can look this up, and we will paste that in YouTube beneath ours, so you can look it up afterwards if you want to sort of do some research on this. But I mean, you're certainly an expert on Martinus's analysis. You have been studying them for many years and translating him for many years, and when you translate an author, you really learn to know the text as well. So we have already seen that book, that small book, as we say, The Ideal Food, and it was published in 1933. It's a long time ago. So could you tell us, what does Martinus say about food and diet in this book?
Well, he says a lot. It's a little book, but it contains so much. And of course, he mentions food in his other works as well. But he says so much. So let's start. One thing he says, very strikingly, is that a very, very small percentage of humanity is actually healthy. And he also says that that we can't be healthy, we can't be 100% healthy until our nutrition is 100% cruelty-free. So we have to. So he encourages us, or he points to the fact that nutrition is a matter of evolution. We go through different evolutionary stages as regards to nutrition, but we will all ultimately get to a stage where we don't have the heart to put things on our plate that have to suffer so that we can do so. So in other words, he would like us, or at least he encourages us, he analyzes the whole question of animal ethics, and he takes up the questions, well, is it okay to kill animals in order to eat? And of course we can do what we like, but everything has a consequence. Whatever we do, it has a consequence. So I mean, there are many consequences for eating meat. The most obvious ones, and these are the ones that are corroborated by nutritional science today, are that we become unhealthy ourselves. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. We become unhealthy, and you can see a lot of research showing that people who eat a lot of animal products get a lot of arteriosclerosis, in other words, hardening of the arteries, heart problems, diabetes. There are enormous problems with obesity. There are all sorts of diseases connected with our nutrition. Jamie Oliver, the British cook, he famously said, I can't remember the numbers now, but I can't remember the numbers, but he pointed to the fact that so many of our illnesses on Earth were diet related, and no one was talking about it. But many people are talking about it now, and there are a lot of sorry. Apropos being healthy, I have a cough. Anyway, so meat eating has many consequences. It has a consequence for our own health, because digesting meat it involves killing on many levels. Firstly, you have to kill the animal, the cow, the pig, or whatever it is, or the fish for that matter. And then when you swallow it, you have to kill the living cells and microparticles within the meat, and that really overburdens the organism. And then we have to get rid of the waste products and so on. So it's there are many levels of killing. First the animal itself, and then all the animals' microbeings, because Martinus points to the fact that we consist of we have an inner universe of living beings. So here am I with my body. I'm alive, but I consist of life. So my heart and my lungs and my stomach and my liver and my kidneys and so on, they're all living beings. They're not just alive, but they're living beings with a consciousness and an experience of life. And within them, there are cells and molecules and smaller particles that all experience life within my organism. But the same is true of a pig or a cow or a fish or whatever, or a chicken. They have living organs, living cells, living microbeings. So when we kill animals in order to eat them, then it involves killing on many levels, and the killing of the microbeings often happens within our organisms. So that overburdens the organism. And a lot of illnesses have been shown to be connected with meat eating. For example, the American cardiologist Dino Ornish, he has famously shown that if you really reduce the consumption of animal products to an absolute minimum, or reduce them completely, eliminate them completely, then you can reverse heart disease. You can reverse certain kinds of heart disease. So it really does mean something for our health. But another area that Martinus covers that's a bit harder to demonstrate scientifically, that's the whole karmic side of things. Of course, becoming ill is karma, but the very fact that we shorten the physical life of other living beings means that we ourselves are susceptible to an unnatural, untimely death. So according to Martinus's analysis, and he writes about this in the Eternal World Picture, Volume 2, then to the extent that we kill other living beings, we ourselves are susceptible to things like accidents, car crashes, plane crashes. And it's a bit like the same sort of energies, because when we kill animals in order to eat them, it's not because we hate them. It's more because we're suffering from the illusion or the superstition, Martinus calls it, that we need to eat the animals in order to survive. And of course, that was my mother's own attitude. So she wasn't putting cows and pigs on our plate because she hated them. She was trying to support a family. So there are no hard feelings involved. The same can happen if you're run over by a bus or you have some sort of accident, then it can be connected to your relationship to the animals. And even wars, the thousands and thousands who today are dying in wars, even that can be connected to meat eating. It can be connected to many other things too. But when we're taking lives, then we are leaving ourselves susceptible to be having our lives taken, so to speak. And when I say that, of course, I realize that Martinus says we have eternal life, that we reincarnate. But when I say our life is taken, what I mean is our physical organism is killed, and we are sent off to the spiritual world on a holiday. We will return, but it's not natural to leave the organism in that way. Pernille, are you there? Yes.
I
Yeah.
I don't know. I made an involuntary break. I don't know. As you said, it's the first time that we try this out.
Yeah, we're trying new technology. So,
but Jonas managed to put me back. Thank you so much, Mary, for this very clear introduction and summary. As you say, it's a small book, but he introduces several basic principles in the book that, of course, are connected to other areas of our lives as well, and not just diet and eating, say the law of karma, and how we should understand that, the consequences it has, as you say, not just on the level that we kill animals, but in our microcosmos. Could you perhaps just say again, what does Martinus mean with our microcosmos?
He means that life as a whole consists of life within life, within life, within life, and that means that Pernille, you have jumped out of the screen again.
Sorry, it's first time we're using it. I'm just cutting between you. You can just speak.
Okay.
I think Jonas, I'm sorry. We would prefer to be in picture at the same time.
Yes.
We see each other.
Yeah. It's a bit disturbing.
Thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you asked about the microcosmos. As I said, life as a whole consists of life within life within life. And that means, as I said before, that if I look at myself, then I consist of organs that have a life and a consciousness. They have an experience of life. And within them, there are cells that also have a consciousness and an experience of life. And within them, there are smaller particles that have a consciousness and experience of life. And so on for all eternity within me. And the same is true if I go the other way. So I am a microbeing in the organism of the earth. According to Martinus, then the human beings are part of the brain of the earth. The earth is a microbeing in the solar system. The solar system is a microbeing in the galaxy, the Milky Way, and so on upwards for all eternity. So in a way, Martinus's concept of God actually is this infinite organism of life within life within life within life within life for all eternity and all infinity. Does that answer your question?
It's beautiful, and you can read about this, of course, in his symbols, for example, symbol number 7, isn't it? Life within
Yes.
life with life. On our English homepage, we have a new English homepage that you can see. It's martinus.dk, and then you go to the English site, and then we have a new English site or a new homepage where you can also read the ideal food online, but you can also buy it actually in our bookshop. Yes, I think it was beautifully described. And if we just move on from that, that means, as Martinus also says, we are like our Godhead for our own microcosmos, because we are used to thinking of ourselves perhaps as dependent on a God, at least in earlier religious traditions, but we have an enormous influence on all those microbeings in our microcosmos.
Mm.
And you have described very clearly the negative consequences it has when we eat the wrong food. He also writes a lot about, we can see that in other works, about, of course, the dangerous effects on drugs and alcohol and smoking and so on. But if we turn it around, it means we have a lot of positive influence that we can use. What should we eat according to Martinus? What does he say in this book?
Yeah, I mean, he talks about the ideal food. The book is called The Ideal Food, and what is ideal for us is different at different stages in evolution. But where we are in evolution at the moment, he says that the ideal food is a mixture of what he calls coarse vegetables, things like root vegetables, potatoes, beetroots, carrots, and all sorts of root vegetables, and green vegetables, things with stalks, both the heavier ones and the lighter ones, and pulses, all sorts of beans and lentils and stuff, and full grains and seeds and nuts and fruit. And fruit is very important. But he talks about the evolution of nutrition, and that we're on a sort of evolutionary path in many ways. We're evolving, our organisms are evolving, we're becoming more refined and more delicate as organisms. Our sexuality is evolving, our morality is evolving, and our nutrition has to evolve to follow that. And gradually, far out in the future, we will live from fruit alone, but we're not there yet. And he says that the ideal food for us at the moment is food that is adapted to our digestive system, that needs a certain amount of roughage, quite a lot of fiber. So we need this good mix of both coarse and very refined vegetarian products. So that's his recommendation. And he talks a little bit at the end of the book about dairy products. And of course, Martinus was a dairyman himself, but he says that dairy products can be used by the vegetarian beginner. Of course, he doesn't define what a beginner is, and you decide for yourself how long you're a beginner. And many people use dairy products as a sort of transition from a meat-eating diet to a vegan diet. But when you read his simple explanations about the evolution of diet, he doesn't actually mention dairy products. So my conclusion from that is that he sees dairy products only as a transition. And of course, we see that the whole dairy industry is connected with an enormous amount of suffering. The cows are artificially inseminated, so that they're almost permanently pregnant because they have to produce a calf in order to produce milk, and the calves are slaughtered so humans can get the milk. I think in 1933, when Martinus wrote the book, then milk production was probably, well, it was less industrialized than it is today, and probably healthier. I mean, now there are all sorts of unhealthy things in milk, like pus and antibiotics and so on. So he stresses that the dairy products. He talks about healthy dairy products. I can't remember the exact wording. It's at the end of this book. Hints for the vegetarian beginner. There's a chapter called that. But I think that's getting harder to find today. So the future is veganism, and of course it's the present for many people. More and more people. I think about 200 people joined the Danish Vegetarian Society so far in January this year. So vegetarianism is and veganism are certainly growing.
Exactly. So it seems to me that especially many young people sort of skip this, what should you call it, this stage of being a vegetarian. And I myself grew up with eggs and dairy products and those things. I said, I haven't even heard of plant-based diet as a child, at least. Today, many people seem to skip that. On the other hand, as I also think it's the policy of the Danish Vegetarian Society, it might be an important first step just to reduce the amount of fish and meat.
Absolutely. As every meat-free meal counts. It's a reduction of suffering. So Martinus himself was very, very tolerant of meat eating, and he understands it's an evolutionary stage. It's something people go through, but it's also something people will leave. And he said famously in an article, he would rather be together with a happy vegetarian?
Tolerant.
It was a tolerant meat eater than an intolerant vegetarian, something like that.
Yeah.
So Martinus wasn't intolerant towards meat eaters, but he felt that it was his duty to analyze the whole issue of human nutrition. And this he has done in The Idea of Food and in many other places.
Yeah, because he published this book very early. I mean, he wrote extensively.
Yeah, it was very early on, and there are details in this book that are only being confirmed by science today or recently. Like, for example, he doesn't recommend frying. He recommends that you don't fry things, and he says that frying produces. He says it produces ash, which can't be digested. When you fry things, then you swallow this ash, as he calls it, and then the organism can't get any benefit from it, and it has to just deal with it and get it out again. I can't remember the name of the chemical acrylamide or something. They've later on found out that if you burn your toast or you fry things so that they get blackened, then it's carcinogenic. So Martinus was writing this in 1933, he's saying don't fry foods. So boil them, bake them, or whatever. But he didn't think frying was a good idea. So I think he was very far ahead of his time, certainly very far ahead of nutritional science at that time.
Yeah, I just wanted to put in, I see that there are some people listening also on YouTube and here in Crowdcast. If you have a question, you're very welcome to write it in the chat. So we could experiment with some interaction as well. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I think that what you just said is very, very interesting. I mean, these things that are being confirmed by recent research. Do you have any other examples? If you just look at today's, I know that research is very multifaceted. You need to carry out a lot of studies, and there are many, many different factors involved when you talk about health and food. So it's difficult to prove things categorically. But are there any trends that you have seen, any studies in the last few years that you think are especially interesting?
Oh, there have been so many, and I'm not an expert on them. But for example, Dr. Michael Greger, he's just been here in Denmark. He's just published a book, How Not to Age. Of course, we all age, but there are good ways of doing it, and bad ways of doing it. For example, Michael Greger, in his lecture the other day in Copenhagen, he talked about alcohol. And there've been many myths about wine, people saying, well, wine is good for you and so on. And Dean Ornish, this American cardiologist, proved long ago that that's a myth. It's really a myth. The good things that you could maybe get from wine, you can get from grape juice or grapes, but then you don't get all the poisonous stuff from the alcohol. And Michael Greger showed study that proved the ideal amount of alcohol was 0. It had no benefits whatsoever. And of course, Martinus would go further, and this is where science maybe has a hard time following, because it actually involves thoughts about reincarnation. I mean, if you take vegetarian products like alcohol, drugs, I mean, cocaine and heroin and so on, they're vegan products. Whiskey's vegan and so on. But Martinus writes that they shake the body to the core, like they're so strong. So you can destroy your health in this life. But he goes further. And of course, science shows that. And I have myself looked after someone in a nursing home who was an alcoholic and had got atrophy of the brain from drinking a lot in this life. So she couldn't speak any longer. She could only sort of grunt, and she couldn't walk by herself, and she couldn't feed herself. She was really, really ill from having drunk alcohol in one life. But he goes further and says that, well, we have talent kernels in our consciousness for building up an organism in the next life. And those talent kernels can be disturbed by things like alcohol and drugs, so that we can create abnormal incarnations in coming lives. So yeah, I think we are dealing with the consequences of that now, and maybe it will increase. I don't know. Yeah, but other research, there's a lot of research showing that plant-based food can reverse heart disease, diabetes. It's good for all sorts of so-called lifestyle diseases. Yeah, there's a new branch of medicine emerging, which they're calling lifestyle medicine. You can't train to be a specialist in lifestyle medicine in Denmark, but you can train in England and America, at least. I don't know where else you can do it. But this whole branch of medicine that's showing that how we behave influences our health. It's really growing, and very much led by a lot of Americans who are terribly good at that. People like Caldwell Esselstyn and Dr. Clapper, who's trying to change the medical training in America so that the doctors actually learn something about nutrition. I mean, up to now, doctors have maybe had one afternoon in the whole of their medical training, one afternoon on nutrition. I mean, it's almost nothing. And yet we go to the doctors for advice, and yeah, they know very little themselves. Of course, it's not their fault. But there are some people in various countries trying to change this. So there is this new branch of medicine emerging called lifestyle medicine, of which nutrition is a large part. Of course, it's not the only part. We need to exercise, we need to sleep, we need to have healthy housing, we need warm clothes when it's cold, and so on. So there are many other aspects to having a healthy lifestyle, not least healthy relationships. And Martinus would also add healthy thoughts. So in his, Martinus's book, Livius book, The Book of Life, Volume 1, came out in 1932. After that, he wrote The Idea of Food, in 33. And then in 34, he wrote a book in Danish called Bisættelse. We have great difficulty translating that title, but it has to do with funerals and how you look after the body after death. But not only that, there's a lot in it about how our thinking influences our microcosmos. So if we have angry, bitter, impatient thoughts, they're going to influence the health of our organs. And if we have happy thoughts and we're tolerant and laughing and so on, it changes our inner climate, so to speak. So I mean, that was 34, and I would say, you know, today we have psychosomatics, the whole science of psychosomatics, how your thoughts affect your health. And I think Martinus was way ahead with his book Bisettelse. Temporarily we're calling it On Funerals in English. We don't have it. We haven't translated it yet, and I don't know what we will end up calling it. But we don't have a good word for that in Danish,
right.
in English.
Anyway, we will find out. Yeah,
we'll find out.
We'll find a name for that book as well. Yeah. I think, but I was just thinking about. I couldn't help thinking the picture when you said. I mean, normally we try to take care of our bodies and our health. I mean, that's an instinct we have as well. If we are cold, like right now, I'm in Sweden, it's winter. We want to have warmth. We want warm clothes and warm houses. And we are hungry. We need food, certainly, but we of course have lost the instinct for having the most healthy food, you could say. But it's still amazing. I think there is, at least in Swedish, a word that you can translate as fact resistance. Yeah. So we had a professor of nutrition who visited us last year in the summer, Gunnar Johansson, professor of nutrition, who told us that they have known for decades, there have been studies for decades, I even think perhaps for 100 years, that meat eating is bad for our health. So actually, if we would be very, very logical, and you can read that in the newspaper, it's bad too, you can get cancer by eating meat, the logical consequence would be, well, then we stop. And of course the same with drugs and alcohol, but we don't. Why don't we? What do you think?
Interesting. And Michael Greger brought it up the other day. He arrived in Copenhagen airport just before his lecture, and he said, "Your airport's full of processed meat, and processed meat has been shown to be a class 1 carcinogen on the same level of smoking or something like that." And you think, well, how can it be that anyone's allowed to sell it? And of course, it has a lot to do with habit, but it also has to do with our sense of taste. And Martinus starts this little book, The Idea of Food, by talking about our sense of taste, that the purpose of the sense of taste is to guide us towards what is healthy and what's good for us and meets our needs. But it has become sort of very, very unreliable. And it can also easily be changed. Like, I was brought up as a Catholic, and in the 6 weeks up to Lent, we used to have to fast in some way, some small way. And as children, typically we stopped eating sweets and stopped eating sugar or chocolate and that kind of thing. And then you had to do this for 6 weeks. And then when Easter came, you could eat all the sugar and all the chocolate you wanted. And we got so sick because, and one thing was, it suddenly tasted so bad. So if you've done that for 6 weeks, I used to put sugar in my tea. 6 weeks with no sugar in my tea, I couldn't put sugar in it again because my taste buds changed, my sense of taste changed. And people who work with fasting, doctors who work with fasting in America, for example, they talk about how people's sense of taste changes dramatically. There was this Dr. Goldhammer, who has a True North Center in California. He puts people on medically supervised fasts, and he talked about some very overweight man who came in. He was very ill, and presented him with some vegan meal, and he thought it was totally disgusting. No way was he going to eat like that. anyway, he was so ill, so the doctor put him on a fast, medically supervised, and then after this fast was over, he gave him this vegan food again. And the man said, "Oh, I'm so glad you've got the new cook, because the food tastes so much better." But it was the same cook, and it was more or less the same food. It was his sense of taste that had changed. So I think a lot of our desire for unhealthy food has to do with habit. And I mean, I've just been in Scotland for a short visit, and you look at things. Oh, I used to eat that, and it would be nice to buy those, and so on. And it's a bit sentimental or something. I mean, I didn't buy anything more harmful than potato scones, but which you can't get yet. But there are a lot of feelings and habits, social habits too, connected with eating certain things. There can also be a lot of social pressure. Like when I wanted to become vegetarian, there was a lot of social pressure from my family not to be vegetarian. And I was so grateful for my musician friends that they were backing me up 100%. And Martinus was backing me up, because I very quickly read his little book. So, and I started reading books on nutrition, and they were backing me up. But there was, and even recently, I was ill, and I went as part of this sort of patient package. I saw a nutritionist at the local hospital, a young woman, and she asked about my diet and so on. And I said, "Well, I'm vegan." And she looked at me and she says, "Oh, so you're committing suicide?" And
that was today. That was
a few years ago, like 6
a few years ago.
Yeah,
still.
But she was a young woman, and a professionally trained nutritionist. And I thought, what? I mean, you expect the nutritionists, especially the young ones, to be more up to date. Mm. So even today, there is a lot of opposition from the surroundings to a plant-based diet. But things are changing slowly. Well, maybe not so slowly. They seem to be changing with leaps and bounds. But there are pockets of strong resistance. But the vegetarian, right. The national vegetarian societies around the world are working on it. So they have.
And it's something like. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's something like it's always difficult to deviate from. Yeah. To say the flock or the herd or whatever you call it, especially when it comes to alcohol, I think.
Yeah, the whole alcohol culture is a difficult one. I worked a lot with young musicians, and especially the ones who play rock and pop music and stuff. They play in areas where a lot of alcohol is consumed, and they feel a lot of pressure to drink it themselves. At the same time, they can see that they lost a lot of their heroes in the hippie epoch. They lost them to alcohol and drugs. So they're a bit split. So when you work in the places where these people study, you can see the consumption of soft drinks is absolutely enormous. That's not the healthiest, but at least it's not alcohol. So it's an enormous amount of sugar. But it's at least it's a step away from having alcohol at every opportunity. I'm not saying they're alcohol free, but they're very aware, like, oh, that great musician, my great hero, he died in his 20s or died very early of drug abuse and so on. So, yeah. Are there any questions popping up? Yeah.
No, I can't see that yet. But
no.
It's a complex picture. I also just thought that I think actually that the number or percentage of young people who don't want to drink alcohol is actually also increasing.
I think so.
I think even if the majority doesn't embrace it yet. And of course, Martinus would explain that by the fact that we gather experiences from life to life. That when we are born again, then some people are just satiated with meat eating, as you were already as a child, and then other people are satiated with alcohol and know from the beginning that they don't want to touch that and
Yeah.
and so on. So we have that as well, and I think I've read that it's actually increasing. But I had one. I see the time's running, and we said we would stop at 5:00. This is a 1-hour session, but I had one question myself, because I can't see any questions in the chat. I think there are many people who really take good care of their health, and certainly some of the people interested in spiritual things that we encounter, for example, at the Martinus Center in Clint, who really, as you do, who read about healthy diet, and they take good care of themselves, and still they can find themselves struggling with some health issues. And you said at the beginning, nobody's perfectly healthy, but they could look at some other people who don't take care of themselves at all, and who seems to be fine, and then turn 90 and they live a very unhealthy life. And some people might just say, well, how come that I do all these things and still I don't feel really healthy? Could you say something about that?
Well, I think our colleague Søren Green had a good model for that, which I like very much. I mean, he drew a curve like that, and with a line, and below the line you have symptoms. Above the line you have no symptoms, and it takes quite a while to destroy yourself, really. And in the context of reincarnation, you could have many lives of doing things that are not optimal for your health, and in the beginning you can get away with it. Like, when I started to become vegetarian, and people were saying, well, look, I'm fit and healthy, and I eat lots of meat, and I drink alcohol, and so on. And look at you, you're feeble, weak thing, and you're the one that's supposed to be eating healthily. But I mean, you can get away with eating unhealthy for a certain period of time, but then sooner or later the symptoms begin to show. And that can be within this life, but it can also be over several lives. So then you start to go downwards, so that your health decreases and decreases until you reach a sort of point where you think, I have to do something about this. I have to find a way out of all this illness and so on. So then I think a lot of people who are interested in spiritual matters, interested in health, they have turned this corner. They're on their way up. They're not symptom free yet, but they're trying to look at their diet. What can I do to improve my diet? What about drink? What about coffee? What about tea? Or is this good? Is that bad? What about my relationships? What about my job? What about the environment I live in? And so on. They start looking at all sorts of factors, the environment, the climate, all sorts of things, to try and improve their health. But they're not healthy yet, but they're on the way up. They're climbing up, and others are on the way down. But you could have, for example, a vegan, teetotal, here, past the bottom, but on his way up, who's not as healthy yet as someone who's on the way down, who's eating meat, drinking alcohol, smoking 40 cigarettes a day, and so on. But the curves change, so everyone will progress. I don't know if that makes it clear, but I think we're at different stages in evolution, and the motivation for improving your habits, I think, comes from suffering primarily. I mean, reading books and theories are a great help, but nothing helps as much as suffering. So when you have had problems, when you want to get out of problems, you look for solutions, and then you start to look at nutrition is one of them. There can be many other things. I don't know if that answers your question.
It certainly does, in a very, very good way. And you mentioned the model by Søren Green, which is one of his books, published in Swedish and Danish so far. So those of you who can read Swedish and Danish can read more about this there. But as you said, also, it's a very positive inspiration that even if you don't feel progress, or even if it doesn't get perfect tomorrow, it's very, very good to continue with the good things for your health, and it will have a positive effect.
Yeah, there was someone, it's just an anecdote, but someone said to Martinus rather proudly, well, I've been in vegetarian for so and so many years. And Martinus said to this person, that will be of great benefit to you in your next life. So it kind of put it into perspective, like evolution is a process that's ongoing, and it took many lives to become as sick as mankind is, and it takes many lives to crawl out of this well of disease that we're in. So, I mean, we're in a situation now where the hospitals are becoming like cities in themselves, and you need a map to get around the hospitals. And if you want to get an appointment, you've got to wait 6 and 7 and 8 months and so on. I mean, it's colossal. The amount of disease on the earth at the moment is just colossal. So, we need to change a lot of things: our thinking, our eating, our drinking, our exercise, our health, and of course, we need peace on earth. I mean, who can be healthy in a war zone? It's there's so much work to be done, individually and collectively.
Yeah. And of course, the realization that Martinus stresses over and over again, that all our experiences, the positive but also the painful experiences, will be something that we gain from, that we learn from in the long run.
Yeah.
All the time. So everything is in that sense very good, as it says in its deepest analysis. So when you have those diseases, as you say, if you're born next life, you will have developed some talents, you will have a lot of empathy with other people, perhaps with the same problems. So you certainly always learn from all your experiences, and everything will be positive in that sense.
Yes, and that learning is only possible when you take reincarnation into account, which Martinus certainly does, and that's maybe too big an issue to come into now, but that's certainly part of his world picture. But I think it also would explain the whole question of fairness, because you could be born with congenital disorders, for example, and you say, well, how can that be fair? A baby is born with this disorder, that disorder, and so on. Where does that come from? What's the meaning? And a lot of people have some sort of existential crisis over that kind of thing. And of course, it doesn't make any sense at all unless it's part of a larger context, where something in the little beings, the little baby's past, is the cause of it. And of course, I say that with the greatest love and respect and empathy for anybody in that situation. I think it's the most hopeful situation, because it puts us in control. Because if something I am doing is making me sick, I can stop it, or I can begin to stop it. I can try to stop it, or I can ask for help to stop it.
Exactly.
And gradually, I will get there, and we all will, sooner or later. So in the future, we will have museums, Martinus predicts, where we'll look back with horror at the instruments we used for killing animals, and the slaughterhouses, and the whole industrialization of the art of killing animals. That will be part of the past. A humane society can't continue being based on so much killing. Totally unnecessary killing. So.
Yeah, I think it's Leo Tolstoy, isn't it? So we sometimes quote, who says, as long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields.
Yeah.
Was some time ago that he wrote that, but we need the experiences before everybody has come to that conclusion. But it's a very cosmic analysis that he expresses in that sense.
Absolutely.
Right, Mary, but we can do something. That's a very positive note to wrap it up with.
Yes.
As a very, very last and briefly, anything that you would like to recommend if anyone feels, I really want to learn more about plant-based food, I want to change my diet. where could you find inspiration?
If I could mention one resource, and there are so
Yes.
many, I would mention nutritionfacts.org. It's Dr. Michael Greger's page. He puts up short videos, almost one a day, about the newest research in plant-based food, or in nutrition in general, the effects of meat eating and the effects of plant-based food. So if you're looking for the science of nutrition, he's an enormous resource, but there are many others. So and we'll put those in the show notes. So in YouTube. Yeah.
And of course, we recommend our own homepage, and also you find more lectures here on Crowdcast. If you scroll down, you will find other lectures on food, mostly in Danish, but also some in English.
Yeah, I have a couple in English called The Idea of Food. Yeah. On YouTube. Yeah.
Great. Mary, thank you so much for joining me from Copenhagen on this wavelength.
Yes, and thank you for joining me from Stockholm.
Thank you. And thank you, Jonas, for helping us. And we will have our next interview at the end of February, the last Sunday in February at 16 o'clock. We'll see what we'll talk about. Perhaps one of those topics that you mentioned that could be discussed further. So thank you so much, and we'll meet again.
Yeah.
Goodbye.